This video has been a long time coming, but with recent events, namely the finale of Game of Thrones Season 8, I believe on the horizon, like literally in the next couple of hours or the next day or so, or whatever. Maybe it's airing right now. I don't care. I just wanted to come out and say this. Game of Thrones was never good. I'm not talking about the show. I'm talking about the original books, right? I don't care about the show. I've never seen the show. And seeing people try to hype it up as some like deep, innovative storytelling, like, ooh, they actually kill off characters. It just, to me, it comes off as shallow and this, like, it's something that's never been done before. Personally, Game of Thrones' success and its popularity speaks more to the failings of the problems with television as a whole, as opposed to like something Game of Thrones does particularly well. Because Game of Thrones is not a well constructed story. Like, I've said this ever since I read the books, like years and years and years ago. Like, it would have been 2013, I would say. It was a couple of years after the show started. People were talking about it, people were hyping it up. So, of course, I ignored the show and went for the book because I'm not a fucking pleb, okay? I went for the books, I read them. I initially really liked them. I liked the dilemmas set up with the characters, I liked the way things were going, I liked their interactions, and then it fell apart immediately after the first book. Why? Because there's no real sense of coherency or sense of conclusiveness or of a real sense of everything blending together seamlessly, right? Like, I think if you really study this kind of thing, study what really goes on in these books and really think about it, like, it feels like a lot of it is very lazy. It's too padded. Like that's what I was thinking of when I tried going back to A Storm of Swords a while back. When I tried reading it again, I did. Yeah, I did. I already did make a video on that one. Why I wasn't going to continue reading the books, right? I tried coming back to it. I tried reading it, but it felt too padded. Like, it felt like there was so much stuff happening that simply does not need to be there. The example I always come up with, right? I think I mentioned this in the review when I was talking about that book specifically, but Arya's storyline, where she's going around and she meets this guy who promises that he'll kill three people, and then like she squanders for her, and then she squanders that promise. Like, he does it, but it results in things that she doesn't want to happen. It's basically just a genie story, right? With like knights and stuff. It's not interesting. It's not unique. It's not creative, and it has no reason to be there. Like, I didn't feel like it really developed Arya's character at all. And like in hindsight, especially considering how unpopular Daenerys has been in the show in the past couple of entries, how people have like been specifically addressing her as like this complete train wreck of a character. Like, looking back on it, like, I feel the same way about Daenerys. Like, I think her storyline, outside of Westeros, like doing some stuff with these forming this army, like, that was the main thing that made me drop the books to begin with, because I simply did not care about anything that was happening to her. Like, I think we should have had one short chapter, explaining what her situation is, the death of her husband, and like her formation of this army, right? But everything else, like, was pretty much pointless. Like, I remember her brother dying pretty clearly, and I remember her husband dying. Uh, that was pretty stupid, by the way. Oh, we're going to we're going to adopt this woman whose village we just murdered, and it was just. What did she think was going to happen? It just they seriously tried playing that as like George R. R. Martin seriously thought that would be shocking or surprising. Really, really. A Storm of Swords was the one that I want to. I kept wanting to say a Storm of Shields. I think that name sounds better, but it doesn't really make any sense. That was the one that people always hyped up, right? That was the one everybody addressed as like being the all-time GOAT, like the greatest of all time in the series, like the one that really made A Song of Ice and Fire, not Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire what it was, like the original books, what it was. And that was because of all the shocking deaths, right? Like namely the Red Wedding. And it was the Red Wedding where I ended up dropping the series, like dismissed it entirely because when that happened, I simply did not care, right? Because keep in mind these books are huge, right? Until this campaign with Rob started, with him like trying to go out and like avenge his father Ned, you don't actually see a whole lot of him. You know he exists and he's a character, but he doesn't really do anything throughout the first two books. And suddenly we're supposed to expect supposed to care about him and his mother getting killed at this wedding by what like Walder Frey. Like I just did not care. And like keep in mind, Catelyn, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Catelyn was actually one of my favorite characters. This is going to be a very controversial opinion, but my favorite characters were were Catelyn and Sansa. Specifically Sansa. Sansa was up to the point where I stopped, my absolute favorite character in this. And I think it's because I think it was kind of an interesting take on the whole like princess in a castle thing, like where she's not really sure what's going on and she's having like all these questioning her values and like what's going on around her and like her idea of what like knights and nobility should be and stuff like that. That was interesting, right? Like it was like if Princess Peach took herself seriously, and that kind of got me interested. And Catelyn, again, this goes back to what I was saying about like these interesting moral dilemmas, like how she like snaps at Jon Snow at the beginning. Like I always remember that as being like an interesting take on it, and that like she does not like Jon Snow, and like both characters are portrayed somewhat sympathetically. So that like the first book was actually my favorite because like it set all this up and it set the stage for like all this stuff. You're introduced to Robert, you're introduced to Ned, you're introduced to like this general idea of like dire wolves and seasons that go on for years at a time and things along those lines. Like you have all these ideas, right? You have like I believe a dire wolf like assaults Joffrey or some shit, something like that, and Ned has to have it killed, and like Sansa is like really really salty. That is like that was interesting. That had me intrigued. I was interested in seeing where it went from here, and going forward, it just ballooned outward into something that like I really really did not care for. Like I didn't care about the throne. I didn't care about who could win. I wasn't like invested in any of these characters. Like they kept doing stupid shit that I didn't care for, like introducing all these kingdoms with these retarded like worldviews and like I just I think the thing the Unsullied, I think they're called, like I want to say it was the Unsullied. People keep bringing those up, and I think that's what these are. It goes back into what I don't like about the Daenerys plotline, right? Like she goes to this city and she's introduced to like these super trained these slaves, right, who are trained for combat, and they're like literally they're literally like immune to pain or something like that. And I was just sitting here thinking like that would not make for a good soldier, right? Because pain is important to uh, in order to sense danger, right? In order to avoid it, in order to when you have a soldier, right, who doesn't feel anything, isn't compassionate, is like only follows orders, like you don't have a person, like you don't have someone who's actually invested in the cause, like you just have someone I don't remember all the details because, like, again, at this point, I was already kind of tuning out of like the Daenerys plotline. It was all really really stupid, right? The books were stupid. Like that's the thing that's getting me about the show right now, and everybody talking about this. Oh, George R. R. Martin is going to get better. No, the books were fairly bad to begin with. Like the only reason this show has taken off, I feel, is because they're willing to buck the books with the books specifically go against modern TV trends of like having every like not being willing to kill off major characters. I think that's the main thing here. The main thing everyone always brings up, like without fail, is like, ooh, characters die in this. You don't know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable. But that does not mean it's a good story. And I felt that way reading the books and seeing how this last season is turning out. Like, I think this really, really needs to be said is that, like, George R. R. Martin has this set up where it's better if he doesn't finish the books. Like, I've seen this brought up before about why he hasn't been working on the books lately. Well, once the books are concluded, once they're finished, once we like know everything that happens, people are going to go back and realize how uninspired it actually was because what was the gimmick of the first book, right? Like people were surprised that Ned, the main character, died right at the end, right? That was the big shocking twist at the end of the first book. Well, he was not the main character. Like Daenerys, Jon Snow, they seem to be setting up as like the real protagonists who have like real plot armor, right? Those characters, right? uh, it just feels the ending to the books is going to be anticlimactic. Like I'm going to say this now. If they're ever finished, I don't think they will be, but assuming they are, like George R. R. Martin is a TV writer through and through. He got his start in television. Like this is what he's good at. Is like setting up these promising ideas, these promising storylines, and never quite following up on them. Like I can guarantee you, he has like some stupid Gainax ending in mind for the end of the series. Like what I personally think is going to happen is that like everyone's going to die and then no one is going to take the throne, or it's going to be someone completely stupid, like uh, Podrick or something like that. Like I don't know. Okay, that's my that's my impression of the matter. Like that's my thing, right? Um, I don't think the ending to the books are going to be magically better than the show. Well, the show is pretty atrocious. Okay, uh, the average novel writer is infinitely better than the average novelist is infinitely better than the TV writer, right? Like, it's going to be better than the TV ending, I'm sure, but it's still going to be underwhelming. People aren't going to be satisfied. There's going to be like all these unresolved plot threads. I think in the grand scheme of things, this show and these books are not going to hold up. Like they're only relevant because of the complete lack of quality content on TV right now. Like I am not exaggerating. There is nothing to watch on TV. Like this is what constitutes like is considered quality television these days. Like Daenerys going crazy and killing people. There are still plenty of fanboys who are defending season 8, defending the last couple of seasons rather. Like how long did it take people to realize that things were going downhill? It's like the whole Final Fantasy thing, right? Like so many people will buy into Final Fantasy 15, buy into 10-2, buy into Final Fantasy 12. None of them acknowledge how bad those games actually are. It's the same deal with Game of Thrones and the same deal with the original books, right? Like nobody, these people don't read anything outside of their comfort zone or even read at all, I imagine. Like seeing Angry Joe, right? Someone who I've seen on camera admit that they don't have time to read, talk about how he hopes the books for like A Song of Ice and Fire are going to be better. Like, dude, you've never read the books. Like, I guarantee you he never read the books. And I just, I feel that way about so many like Game of Thrones fans. It just the show fans, right? I, I feel I feel like this just it was always overhyped, right? Like people tuned in for the sex, tuned in for the violence, and they didn't really think about, whether this was an actually good fantasy story because it isn't. There is so much out there, so much more out there that's better than it. The only reason Game of Thrones is being talked about at all, the only reason it ever became relevant at all, is because of the adaptation, because of the TV show. It's the equivalent of saying that like The Witcher is like some high quality video game IP because it was like adapted from a novel. Like that's something I want to do, by the way. Buy those Witcher novels and live stream myself reading them and giving my thoughts on them. I need to do that. But anyway, man, Game of Thrones sucks. Like looking back on it, like looking back on my memories of the book, like I kind of wanted to go back and read them again. Considering the finale and giving more specific thoughts on them. But like, I don't even think I'm gonna waste my time. Like I remember why I don't like this whole deal with the show ending and everything like that. Like I remember everything that I didn't like about these books. I remember the terrible pacing. I remember the padded nature of it. Like I remember like all these point of view characters that don't need to be there. These plot lines that don't go anywhere. Characters that like become relevant out of nowhere with no real build up. Robb Stark, Theon Greyjoy, things like that. It was just stupid, right? Uh, People don't like that word you being used when it comes to Game of Thrones or their super serious dark fantasy, but that's true. Is that like this is at the end of the day not good storytelling, not in the show and not in the novel. Game of Thrones was never good.